Hmm. All right. I'm trying to set up this stream. I hope this is not another false start. Anyway, um, so welcome. My name is Joe, and this is my channel, Fighting Words. And this is a Tangent Tuesday. And on Tangent Tuesdays, I sort of riff on whatever comes to my mind. So, for starters, um, just a little channel update. I surpassed 100 subscribers, which is a big deal for me. Also, I have cats. They can't decide what side of the door they want to be on. So surpassed 100 subscribers. So thank you for everyone who has subscribed to my channel. And to sort of celebrate that, if you guys have any questions, like Q&A style questions, just generic stuff, I thought maybe we could make next month's Tangent Tuesday, that would be the second Tuesday in April, we can make that a Q&A session. So if you have any Q&A style questions, you can drop your Q's in the comments here, and that will sort of help me gauge how much interest there is in that. And if there isn't a whole lot of interest, I'll just move on to a different subject. But you're welcome to drop any questions there. You got about a month to do it, and yeah, we can make next month's Tangent Tuesdays a Q&A. So, also a few other little channel updatey things. I'm starting to change up the format of the reviews and some other stuff that I'm doing. I'm trying to expand what I'm actually talking about besides book reviews. So, hopefully you guys will enjoy the upcoming content. Like my video last Friday, for instance, was on how to choose a martial arts school. So, anyway, so I have other things like that I'm researching. And in that vein, I actually recently got in a total of 5 books. I'm not going to, I didn't get them so that I would have more books to review. I got them because they are on subjects that I would like to do research on and do non-book review videos on. So I got 2 on the early UFCs. One is This Legal? By Art Davie, who was actually the founder of the UFC. Another one was John McCarthy's autobiography. He was a longtime referee for the UFC. I got another book on, it's called Opening Closed Guard. It's by Robert Drysdale, and it's interviews with different Brazilian martial arts masters, and it's trying to investigate the history and development of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And I've only thumbed through it, but in some of these interviews, they're already mentioning the influence of things like, catch wrestling, luta libre, capoeira. So I think it's going to be a very fun read. And of course, once I get into it, I'll post up a video on that one. I might actually just do as a straight review, but I'd like to get more into the history. And then I also have 2 history books on the history of the Shaolin Temple. And they're both scholarly texts, which I appreciate, but also I'm probably going to get to them last because, frankly, I love scholarly texts because they give you, they cite their sources, they give you references, right? But also, usually they're about as dry as sandpaper. But with that being said, one of them is specifically on the development of Chinese martial arts where it concerns the history of the Shaolin Temple, and the other is more on the general history of the Shaolin Temple, not necessarily specified to martial arts. And I think that these things are important to have because they're going to be important for myth busting, all 5 of these books. And that sort of brings us into tonight's topic. So, since made my last Tangent Tuesday video, I've had various interactions on the internet, and it's amazing what some people will believe, and why some people believe it. So, initially I thought about this because this video, because I listened to an interview of a gentleman interviewing a Jeet Kune Do fella, and this must have been around summer of last year. There were some letters that went up for auction that were between Bruce Lee and another gentleman, and in those letters, Bruce Lee is basically asking him to buy drugs for him. And I don't recall there being, I recall it being like, oh, really? That's new and interesting information. And of course, people took different slants on that. But what was interesting about the interview, it looked like, if I recall the timestamp, it was about 30 minutes long. I got 8 minutes into it and just shut it off, because for 8 minutes, for the entirety of what I'd listened to, the interviewer, bless his heart, was just heartbroken about, it seems like a lot of people are talking about the bad things that Bruce Lee did. I just want to remember him as a hero. And the guy he's interviewing is like, okay, yeah, Bruce Lee was, he was sympathizing with him, but he wasn't really offering a whole lot to assuage his feelings, I guess. And similarly on the subject of Bruce Lee, I had an interaction last week. Somebody posted a thing in a Facebook group. It was a story allegedly about Bruce Lee. And I came on that thread to point out that there's no record of that particular story taking place, And I have to confess, I find it humorously ironic that all these people who worship the ground that Bruce Lee walks on wanted to just believe that story with all their heart, because it was a story that resonated with people. I'm like, okay, I get the moral of the story. I like the moral of the story, but me, the skeptic, actually has, the books John Little has been writing on, Striking Thoughts and Letters to the Dragon, and, and probably once or twice a week, I'll catch an interview, either a recorded one or a written one, of somebody relating, one of Bruce Lee's friends talking about what he was like, or one of his students telling stories about him, or whatever, or just a general biographical article. So these guys that wanted to believe this story so bad were not big enough fans of Bruce Lee to actually read about the life of Bruce Lee. And obviously it all comes down to a case of hero worship. And what was this? I think the saying is from The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and I hope I'm going to get it right. The movie, apparently, not the book. I did skim a little bit of research into this. But there's a line at the end of the movie, which is, when the legend becomes the truth, print the legend. And I think that there's a lot of that going on with martial arts. As people, we tend to be really invested in our heroes, to the point where, God knows, Bruce Lee has a wide-spanning cult of personality around him, for one example. He isn't the only one. But, we want to believe in these things so bad that they overtake our sense of reason, In another instance, I posted a link to an article on the history of Xingyi, and the quote that I chose to use sort of made the point of, because something is called internal, it doesn't mean that it's magical. And again, I had to laugh or else it would have made me cry. The number of grown-ups in the 21st century who didn't want to hear that there's no such thing as magical powers really surprised me. And one guy commented, there are tales about, a guy who was getting punched in the face and he could move his chi to that area, and the other guy broke his hand and he was unharmed. And okay, the tales. All right, so there's no person like that around right now. We couldn't bring someone in for a scientific test of face punching, And personally, I'd never heard that particular tale. I can almost see how that would have its roots in something that happened. It's not uncommon for people to injure their hands. So, okay, this guy went to punch another dude, and, if he ducked or anything, and the guy's fist collided with, the top of his skull or something, like, oh, he broke his hand, and maybe it's something that turned into a tall tale. But then there are other stories, like, staying with Xingyi. I'm reviewing a book right now where in the introduction, it's going through the history of Xingyi and references someone he could jump 8 feet in the air. And I was like, that seems really extraordinary. So I decided to look up what the current world record for the high jump is. And it's just a little bit over 6 feet, or 8 feet, excuse me. So this guy, the story is, this guy using his incredible chi power was able to jump to a height that, like, trained world-class athletes who have proper high jump technique have only just been able to, skim over, right? I don't believe it. I don't believe that there was a human being who could just do a standing jump 8 feet in the air. Especially, a middle-aged dude living in Republic-era China or wherever. I could be getting the time frame off there. I find that incredibly hard to believe. But people eat that stuff up because there are tales, right? And that actually reminded me of, there's this Irish legend about a group of warriors called the Fianna. I may be completely mangling that name. And, they went through these rigorous tests. And one of those tests is to run under a branch that is held at the height of one's knees. And immediately, anyone hearing that should go, okay, that's fake. This is why this is in the realm of legend, because if you know what running is and how knees work, then you know that you can crawl under a branch, you can limbo under a branch, you can, squirm under one, I guess. You're not going to run under one that is the height of your knees. If I don't believe that, why should I believe this other thing about this guy who could jump 8 feet in the air? Or this guy who would break other people's fists with his face, I guess. I sometimes think that there's a lack of critical thinking when we just want to believe something so much, and on the other side of that, hearing from some people that, the Gracies handpicked their opponents for the UFCs. And as someone who was already doing research, I've read a lot on the history of the UFCs, especially the early ones. That statement is untrue. It's a common myth. And I think it's a myth that gets knocked around because people want to dismiss the lessons learned from the UFCs, and I mean, there are definitely several things that are true, like, which Gracie? Hori and Gracie owned a share in the company that helped finance the UFC. Okay, that part's true. The Gracies definitely had their fingers in the pie. But the idea that they only picked people that they knew they could beat, Again, this is a subject for a longer video, but like, who was going to beat him? Who? You know, and you can look at not just how the Gracies performed and not just the UFC's performance, but, you know, Rickson Gracie performed, he won 2 Vale Tudo Japan tournaments. You know, Renzo Gracie won, was it Martial Arts Reality Super Fight? And again, even outside of the Gracies, like submission fighters, you know, Ken Shamrock was effectively the #2 submission guy in the world at that time. And Royce made him look like an amateur, right? You know, Frank Shamrock, which was Ken's adopted brother, beat a wrestler in no time at all because he knew submissions and the wrestler didn't. You know, if you hadn't had the Gracies in that equation, you still would have seen submission specialists beating pure wrestlers, beating traditional martial artists, beating highly decorated sports strikers. We know that, I mean, Ramon Deckers fought, I think it was Genki Sudo, you know, and got tapped out with a heel hook in no time, right? Francois Botha, might be mispronouncing his name too, fought Yoshihiro Akiyama, who, he outweighed Akiyama by, I want to say 60 pounds, and Akiyama was a judoka, and he beat this guy who'd been, you know, like a heavyweight boxing contender and had fought in kickboxing. The results wouldn't have been different. And it's very difficult sometimes to not let our personal biases about, you know, different martial artists, different systems, whether it's the hero worship type as with Bruce Lee, or whatever the opposite of that is with the Gracies, we shouldn't let those biases, number one, distort reality. You know, we should strive for the truth in all things. You know, because if we believe and perpetuate something that is not the truth, somebody holds up a piece of paper that's like, that's the truth, right there. Don't you look dumb? Because you will look dumb if you don't search for the truth. So there's that, and also the reality of situations should not be ignored. And if you believe mastery of chi will make you a better high jumper than Olympic athletes who are training for the high jump, you're delusional. You know? Similarly, when I was on Yahoo Answers, I went back and forth a couple of times with this one guy who was convinced. You know, the question comes up a couple of times in just like broad martial arts groups. Like, is a palm strike or a punch better? Or excuse me, yeah. And, you know, me being me, I was like, well, here are the benefits of a punch, here's the benefits of a palm strike, and, you know, here are the drawbacks of one and the other. This guy, on multiple occasions, posted that a palm strike was 8 times as powerful as a punch. Me, an amateur student of body mechanics, was like, okay, hold up. How? Because when it comes to power generation in a strike, you know, there's a lot of moving parts in that. You know, you got to push off of the ground, you got to dig your toes in, you got to, you know, pump your hips and twist your waist and, you know, turn your shoulder and like lock this part in place so you're able to transfer. You got to, extend your arm. So what's going on, like, from the wrist on down, when it comes to power generation, is among the least important things going on, right? I was like, please cite your source. Please. I would love to see your reasoning behind this. And he did cite a source, and his source was an article where this master in his martial art gave the opinion that a palm strike was 8 times as powerful as a punch. No testing of that at all, no research, not even anything other than this is what I feel. This is the thing that I feel in my gut, and I'm going to tell it. And this dude, who I was, I guess, arguing with, took it as gospel. And I knew that he was an experienced martial artist, so how much of your own personal knowledge and experience of martial arts would you have to discard just because this guy gave an opinion? Because this guy must have had some of the same learning as I have had about generation of the power of punches and strikes and stuff. You know? And this becomes important when you consider that if you perpetuate something like this, you know, you and your students and your cohorts, the people who train with this idea in mind, might greatly overestimate their ability to do damage with a palm strike as opposed to a punch. You know, I mean, 8 times is quantifiable, right? You know, it's the difference between lifting 10 pounds and 80 pounds. It's massive, right? So yeah, we as martial artists need to get better at our critical thinking. We need to be more grounded in reality. You know, we should not discard evidence just because we don't like the messenger. And we shouldn't accept things blindly just because we do like the messenger. I mean, you know, I'm fortunate enough between, you know, brilliant authors in some cases, guys I really agree with. And, you know, I've also had excellent teachers and great training partners. I don't know if there's anyone I don't disagree with on something. You know, it might be something small, you know, but I have my reasoning for believing a thing and they have other reasoning. And often within people I actually know, we can talk this out. We can explain, well, this is why I favor this. Okay, well, this is why I favor something else. If we can do that with each other, we shouldn't be afraid to do that if, you know, Grandmaster whoever gives an opinion on something. We should look at it critically. You know, especially if somebody is talking about something that isn't in their wheelhouse. I've seen people have very strong opinions on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who have never done any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Anyway. And of course the same thing goes with like karate and taekwondo. You know, there are people who suddenly seem to have a whole lot of knowledge about something that they haven't actually looked into. I could go on with that for days. But I won't. I think I have effectively made my point. So yeah, I want to thank people for listening to this. This got kind of ranty. I sort of apologize for that, but I do think that the main message, let's be critical. Let's be critical of everything. Let's make sure we understand context. You know, if something sounds questionable, like if your buddy Jimbo, who never trained martial arts, told you that a palm strike was 8 times as powerful as a punch, would you believe him? Probably not. Why would you believe the other guy? You know, it's... Don't fall into the logical fallacy of appeal to authority. You know, there's something to be said for that, but just because a guy's got, you know, a belt that's a much deeper color than yours doesn't make him infallible. It doesn't mean that he knows everything. I don't know. Let's just be critical thinkers. You know, that's sort of why I like doing, you know, the book reviews and stuff, because I'm letting people know this source has this sort of knowledge. If you want this sort of knowledge, here's where you can find it. And anyway, my cat sneezed. Hello, Harper. Anyway, to finish up, let's go back to the beginning. Thank you, my, at this point, 114 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. I do appreciate it. And once again, if you do have a question for a Q&A session, please leave it in the comments. And I'll see you guys. Well, I'll have a review on Friday, but I'll do another live next month. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you then.